which is the national curriculum provider for emerging leaders. So we hire all of your instructors in your local communities, and we also provide the curriculum that you all learn from. So today we have Mary Marshall leading our webinar. She has been the Seattle Emerging Leaders Instructor since 2013, and we're really excited to hear what she has to share. So I've muted everyone's lines to eliminate background noise, but feel free to chat in questions, and you can also chat in your phone number, and we can unmute your specific line. So Mary, take it away.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for that, and welcome to everybody who's here today. I have been working with entrepreneurs for about 20 years now, and I have to say that the class that I teach through Interise at the SBA has some of the best content I've ever seen, and it's why I enjoy teaching it so much, because it aligns so much with what I believe. So today we're going to spend a little bit of time on culture, and then secondarily on hiring based on values and for one's culture, because I believe that culture is the foundation for successful businesses. So what we're going to talk about today is something that I've written about in my book, The Entrepreneurial Puzzle, and it's called Intentional Culture. And then how do you identify yours, starting with values, clarifying your mission and vision, and then describing your intentional culture in 3 words or less, and then hiring for values, which is how you really create a very intentional culture. So, and we'll keep this pretty light, so if you have questions or don't understand anything along the way, please feel free to chime in. I'm happy to answer. So, culture is kind of one of those words where a lot of people have different descriptions of it. So I just like to sort of start out with what I mean by it and what we're going to be talking about today. So if you look it up in Webster's, here's the definition. A particular society that has its own beliefs, ways of life, art, etc., a way of thinking, behaving, or working that exists in an organization or workplace. And that's really what we're talking about today, because every single business has a culture. Whether it's intentional or not, it's there. And so what I like to say is intentional culture is the daily demonstration of the company's values. Now, a lot of companies have stated values. You'll see them on the wall. And, sometimes there's a disconnect between what's really happening in the company and what those values or that mission and vision say. However, the culture is either intentional or unintentional. And so it's the manifestation of those stated values, meaning that they're lived, or it's unstated and it's real values that the companies are living by, and these are unintentional. And what you don't want is to have an unintentional culture in your business. Just think of it like a circle with a bunch of arrows in it. If you have an intentional culture, all those arrows are headed in the right direction. If you don't have an intentional culture, the arrows are all heading in their own direction, because we're all driven by our values. And so when we get into an organization, it's either a fit for us or it's not. And so mission and vision are a complete waste of time if they're not reinforced through a daily demonstration of the values. So the big question is, so why does it matter? You're busy, you're trying to make money, you're hiring people, you're providing services and products to people. Why does your culture matter? Well, it really can be the difference between success and failure of an organization. Aligned intentional cultures tend to produce higher satisfaction with employees and customers, and they achieve their goals. It becomes really easy to attract the right talent, and growth is generally the result of intentional cultures. And so if we think about, just a quick story about intentional culture. I'm from Seattle, and here we have lots of big companies. 2 of big ones are both Microsoft and Amazon. Now, Microsoft started out with a culture of, pretty much dog eat dog. I mean, I knew lots of people 20 years ago who were interviewing and working there, and the interview process there was brutal, to say the least, in order to be one of their developers, because they wanted the best of the best. And that created some really amazing products early on. It fueled their growth, and, it was sort of who they were as a culture. As they grew to be a much larger organization, that particular mindset didn't scale as well, and then their products started to falter a little bit because they didn't adapt to the larger organization that they had become. Similar story just recently with Amazon. Amazon's very clear on what their culture is. They have 14 principles that they live by. In my mind, that's a little too many, but they do. But they recently just got raked over the coals in a op-ed piece in the Wall Street, or I guess it was the New York Times, because of this, workaholic culture that they have there, and all because they started out with these very intentional principles that they lived by, which fueled their success and got them to where they got. But what happened was Bezos has a need for data, and he believes in data on everything. And so he wanted more data on his people. And so what he created was this back-end system where people could rank other people. Well, one of their principles is trust. And yet they have this back-end system where people can actually write in and criticize one another or rank one another anonymously. So how can you feel like you're in a trusting culture when you have this tool that says it's okay to backstab other employees? So it was a complete disconnect, and that was a very unintentional consequence of one of the actions. And that's just, a couple of examples of why it matters. Let's see, next one here. So what I like to start with is values. If you are clear on your values, everything else in the organization becomes really easy. And these are a person's principles or standards of behavior, one's judgment of what's important in life, ethics, morals, standards, that kind of thing. Every single person you hire has these values. Whether they know it or not, they have them. You have them too, and your company also has them. Typically, your company's values are very similar to your own values. But a lot of times people go, well, of course, honesty, integrity, customer service. Well, those are values, but my guess is there's probably something underneath that. So then people go, well, that's values, it's kind of touchy-feely, I don't really want it in my business, so why do they matter? And this is 4 statements that if you're familiar with Simon Sinek, he talks about these in his Why video. Values drive beliefs, and beliefs drive behaviors. Behavior drives performance, and performance drives results. So if you have cultural alignment in your organization, you will get results, good results that you intended to begin with. And that's why values matter. They're really at the foundation of everything. So the tough part is, identifying your values. And so if you think of them as the foundation, they're really what holds everything else up, the framework, everything. And so, people, when I do these values exercises, and many of you have probably participated in this, where you've, gone around, everybody lists a bunch of values, and then you vote on them, and everybody goes, great. And then the next day, nobody cares. Because it didn't really matter. So the thing about values and identifying your own values is this is the piece where it's really important that you take your time and figure them out. So in an organization, there's a couple of ways to find them. And this also works for you personally, but we'll talk about it as an organization. So what are the company's important stories? Like when you were founded, what were some of the pivotal stories that you can think back of and you remember like it was yesterday? And when you retell that story, somewhere in there, there's a value that you had or that the company has embraced that is why you're here today and that why you managed to survive or thrive, because there was some value in there. Maybe it was flexibility, maybe it was perseverance, maybe it was collaboration or something like that. Okay, we're getting some background here.
Sorry. I think
Okay.
we just muted them. Sorry about that.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So it's in your stories, you want to think about, what are your stories, what are your company stories. If you think about personal stories, that's where you'll find them. For me personally, I had a childhood that was pretty chaotic, but one of the people that was always there for me was my grandfather, and there was a particular moment when my whole family was sort of falling apart. My dad had left, and it was just like complete chaos. And my grandpa came over and redid this room for me. I had been gone for a year and exchanged and came back, and very slowly and surely we transformed this room from something that was really not very pleasant into this girl's room. And he showed me how to do it. And the whole time he didn't say anything except, I'll never understand, how your father could leave a family of 7 kids. And he goes, because you always do the right thing. And so I was 15 when I heard that story, and for the rest of my life, that has been my guiding principle, always do the right thing. And so for me, that's authenticity. And so every one of you has those stories from, your past that make up the values. The other way to find your values other than your stories are your high fives and your hell no moments. And these are, again, if we look at them for a company, it's like a celebration that you had in the company. What was something that was just amazing that you were able to do as a team because everybody got together and did it, and that was a high five. What were you celebrating? What value was at the core of whatever that celebration was? And the other ones are hell no moments. Hell no moments are those where you're not going to cross a value because of a belief that you have. So, a hell no moment, is something in your organization where a customer demanded something and, we all believe that the customer's always right, but in this particular case it wasn't. Well, that was crossing a line with your company's values. So, and there are times when you look at an employee situation or something in the organization, and for example, I had 2 employees who were arguing all the time. Could never get along, but both of them had very good skill sets. And I really couldn't understand what was going on with these 2 people. Well, bottom line, they had very, very different values, and there was no way that either of them was ever going to come over to the other person's values. However, when we identified the values of these people, and that there are no right or wrong values, they just are. They're either yours or not. There's some that are more successful than others, but they kind of understood where the other person was coming from. They never did like one another, but they were then able to work together. Because when you have a bunch of people in an organization who share different values, they're never going to collaborate well on anything. And so it's the one thing that you have to look at, because you can change people's behavior, you can train them, you can change skills, but at the end of the day, you cannot change their values. Those are pretty hardwired. So if you go through and you figure out your own high five moments, your own hell no moments, and your important stories, both personally and then in your business, my guess is you're going to have some values that emerge from that exercise. So here's just a list of some values, and they really can be anything. Creativity, impact, excellence, adaptability, analytical focus, you name it. Any of these are values. The important thing about each of these values is to then define them. Because you can have courage, for example, and courage can mean, several different things to different people. So the important thing is, what does it mean to you, and what does it mean to your organization? So it's not okay to just write them down and say, yeah, these are our values. It's being able to explain those values. And one of the other really important things about identifying one's values is that it's like an old overcoat. You actually have to wear it around for a while until you're sure that that's actually yours. So, for example, when I started going through this exercise, and it's probably been 5 or 6 years, and I sort of thought that I knew what my values are. Come to find out, I didn't know what my values were at all. I mean, I sort of knew how I behaved, but I couldn't figure out how to put it into words. So eventually I came up with creativity, caring, curiosity, integrity, and authenticity. Now, what you have to do is then, 3 or 4 weeks later, go, okay, what were my values? And if you really can't remember them, they're probably not your values. Well, what I found was that integrity and authenticity really mean the same thing to me. So I dropped integrity and sort of mapped that into authenticity, and then I can pretty much remember mine. Then I had a few others on there too, but I could never remember them when I went to recite them. So I ended up with those 4. And so they really act as guideposts for all the decisions I make, for everything that I do. My personal mission is to make a difference with people who care. And so those are the types of work that I look for. So it's important to, have a statement or two about what the value means to you and to your organization. And also then to wear it around for a while and see if it's really the right one. For example, I had an organization whose value was fun. This was one of their values. And I said, okay, great. So what does that mean to you? Well, we have fun. I said, okay. So how do you guys have fun? Well, we have a picnic once a year. Well, a picnic once a year is not exactly fun. If most employees were coming into the organization seeing that one of the values was fun and realized that what that really meant is they had a once-a-year picnic, I doubt many of them would stay if one of the things that attracted them to the organization was indeed fun. So it's just you have to sort of be careful about, your definition and if in fact that's really a value of the organization. So once you have your values sort of set and figure out, how you're going to use them in an organization, then the idea is how do we wrap those into our mission and vision? Now, I know a lot of you were already on the webinar early on mission and vision, and so I'm one of these people who tries to make things really easy because I don't do well with complicated stuff. So what I like to say is that the mission answers the question, why are we here and what do we stand for? And vision is the future that will exist if you succeed in your mission. And then values are the beliefs at the core of your business that act as a compass to guide behavior and decisions of everyone in the company. And one of the ways that this played out for me very, very visually was I used to run CEO groups for an organization called Vistage. And I had about 18 CEOs in this one group, and we had a speaker one time, and we were at a software company was hosting the business, and the speaker came in, and this guy, his name was Peter Schutz, and he used to be the CEO of Porsche. And we were walking through the organization, and he's looking around at the cubicles, and he says, I bet you this organization has trouble meeting their deadlines. And I looked at him, and which was indeed one of the biggest challenges of the organization. And he goes, and I bet that there's not a lot of accountability. And I said, yeah. And I said, how do you know that? And he goes, look around. You can feel it. He goes, forget the mission and vision they have on the wall. But look around. The desks are messy. Not everybody's there. It's chaos. Everything around was chaos. And in fact, the entrepreneur owner of this business was a brilliant, brilliant man and inventor. But the organization was chaos, and they had very difficult time, meeting deadlines because everything was fascinating. He always wanted to start it on a new project. And so anyway, we had a very interesting conversation that day with his talk, and the owner had a few ahas. But that's how mission, vision, values sort of show up in an organization and that would be completely unintentional because that was not the intention of the company he wanted to run, but it manifested from his own beliefs and values. So when you're thinking about your mission, I just do it X, Y, Z. So we exist to do what? What are we doing? Who are we doing it for? And how do we do it? It doesn't need to be paragraphs long. It needs to be simple. It needs to be something that, when you bring on somebody from your organization, whoever's doing the onboarding can actually train them easily and move them through it. So this is one of my clients. We're committed to designing and manufacturing the best positional support systems for every wheelchair user. We make it easily adaptable to individual needs and empower every person to achieve their best. So it tells you, what they do. They make wheelchair positioning systems, who they do it for, people in wheelchairs, and how they do it, making it easily adaptable so people can do their best. So it's very, very simple, and it's easy to do it when you think about that. And then when you think about vision is the big thing. Vision is the future you're making. Defining your vision is about looking beyond the constraints that are today and looking at what could be. So it's like when you're creating your growth plans, and I really encourage my participants to think out of the box. Think as if none of the restrictions that you had today were there. What would you do? I used to make people actually close their eyes when I'd work with CEOs and sit in their offices and really move themselves 3 years down the road and tell me what their office looked like, what their company looked like, how many people did they have, what were their revenues, who were their customers, what problem were they solving, and, really envision it. And that's what vision really is getting out there so that you can say, yes, this is what I want, and this is what I'm creating, and then you move it back. Okay, a year from now will be X. Or another friend of mine wrote a book called Give Your Elevator Pitch a Lift, and her big thing is what spins your jets. So when she's working with people, it's always about, what makes you really happy. So maximum mobility for every wheelchair user, or Gates's was originally a computer in every home. Those are big visions. And when you think about a lot of the companies that are out there today, especially the big companies, originally they had a pretty big vision and they managed to get there. And you as entrepreneurs, if you're crystal clear on that vision, you have a solid mission and you have solid values at the foundation of that, it's much easier to achieve that going forward. So there we go, values. So what's your intentional culture? What is it that you really intend in your business? So here's mine. Caring, curiosity, creativity, and authenticity. So everything I do has to have these at its foundation or I'm just simply not happy. And so when you think about your company, I'm sure probably some of you have read some works by Patrick Lencioni. He's written multiple books, but he wrote a book, I think it was called CEO Fables quite some time ago, and he would write in sort of fable-telling ways. And he talked about a company whose 3 words or 3 values were hungry, humble, and smart. And so the whole company was created around those 3 particular words. Everybody they hired in, everything they did, what customers they took on, and consequently it was an incredibly successful company in a very competitive space. So once you define your 3 words, then it's about, the meanings and what do each of these mean to you. And part of your role as a leader in this is that you have to communicate this. And if you don't understand it clearly, your organization will never adopt it, because it's one of those things, especially in a small entrepreneurial business, it's all about the leader. It's all about the leader being crystal clear on this. Some of you may be familiar with Tony Hsieh and Zappos and that whole Zappos story. His story is really all about values. His story is about this very, very intentional culture that led them to this, huge success as an organization, because everything they did lived and breathed the values of Tony Hsieh and then what he empowered his team to do. So it's not something that you can write down, do once, and put up on the wall. You have to really embrace it throughout the organization. So the next thing you as the CEO have to do is create your communication plan. You have to tell the story. Everybody needs to know. Your customers need to know. Your employees need to know. Your vendors need to know. Your family needs to know. I mean, why are you working all these long hours? So you've got to be brave and go out there and talk about it and not feel weird about telling people what your company values are. And the more people know, the less chance you have of failing. It's completely your safety net because customers will challenge you. Well, I thought one of your values was this, and yet you're doing this. It's easier for employees to call one another out on something that may or may not, be being done right. Hey, that's really not how we do things here. We do them like this because this is more important for us. So, you have to tell your employees. You have to post it. You have to put it on all your forms. You have to have fun with it. You have to tell your customers and vendors. I have a company here in Seattle that I worked with, really fun company, and they did this exercise, and it took them multiple days to come up with, what their values were. But they're a creative outfit. They do marketing for a lot of different companies, and they're a fairly large company. So, of course, they created a little desk stand that they could put on everybody's desk when they were finished. But the first one was called Be Real. And so they said, expose yourself, be real, be free to be your unique, wonderful, talented self, and don't show up as somebody else. And that's what I mean about a definition of it. And then a second one that they had was now. Believe it or not, that was a value. And it was do what you know is right now. And it was just always, sort of trust your instincts to make swift and thoughtful decisions and own it. And that's what they meant by now. And then another one was share success, celebrate contribution. When one of us succeeds, we all do. Give credit loudly and openly. And this particular company, they came up with 7. I typically recommend staying between 3 and 5. It's really hard to remember after 5. So if you, kind of dial it back, it's a little bit easier. Another one of theirs was be courageous. Think fresh, open your mind to new ways, brighter ideas, different paths, and then make them happen. And the last one was truth heals, and sometimes it hurts. Honesty isn't always easy, but it's always necessary. Be kind, but be brave. So, I guess they had one more. Yeah, this was the one that was a bit controversial, and they had about, I think they have about 80 employees. Love. So love is one of their values, and they say love, yes, love. Care passionately about what you do and everyone you encounter. Use your heart. And so that's an organization that was really dysfunctional, I have to say. They were not achieving their numbers. There was good people were leaving. They couldn't attract good talent, and in their industry, that was all about making them successful. And the problem was there was a hired CEO in the organization who had very different values and really, quite frankly, didn't believe in marketing, and so he thought most of their employees weren't very bright and what they did didn't matter, which, of course, all the employees know. Whether you tell them or not, they know it. They feel it. And so the second-in-command person led this exercise to do this values thing, and it completely transformed the organization. And needless to say, the board booted out the previous CEO and hired the person who did this, and the company's been very successful ever since. So when you think about organizations that have done a turnaround, I can tell you at some point or at some place in their evolution, they have embraced values, hopefully overtly, but they have created an intentional culture. The other way to think about this is when you think about a merger of two companies coming together, there's never really a merger. There's one culture that wins out over the other one. And typically, the people who didn't come with that original culture slowly will go away if they were really tied to whatever the culture was at the other organization. So, it's about matching people to whatever that might be. So living your intentional culture, once you've decided on it, once you've figured out what your values were and how you're going to do it, how you're going to talk about it, what they mean, what your mission and vision value is, it's got to be lived daily. You have to use it really as the kitty bumpers in the bowling alley to make sure that you don't get gutter balls. If this is the only thing you remember out of this presentation, it really is easy to create an intentional culture if you've got your values down. You incorporate it into the look and feel of your office, like the company I mentioned. When I go into a company, I instantly try and guess what their values are because you can feel it. It's tangible. Just like when you go into a school and they all have uniforms on. Okay, that means something. Are things neat and clean? Are they tidy? Are they structured? Do people come together? Is it loud and boisterous, or is it very quiet and somber? Every organization is living their values daily, and it's up to us to sort of figure out what that is. You want to, shout it from the rooftop for your customers and for your employees. So if you have a value of service or customer service, and you go into, somebody walks into your office and there's nobody to greet them, or it takes them 10 clicks on the voicemail system to get a voice, that's inconsistent with one of your values. So you're not living it on a regular basis. You have to make sure that everything you do in your company is in fact, aligned with what that is. And we'll talk about hiring practices in just a few minutes, but that is definitely one of the first ways that you're going to incorporate them in. Another one is in your sales process. So if you have a collaborative sales process or collaboration as one of your values, then it would make sense that your sales process incorporated everybody into it. At my company, when I had a company for about 10 years, we sold barcode data collection systems. And so we had a very collaborative sales process. It was a team-oriented approach with a technical person and then somebody that did the software and then somebody that did the hardware. I had one particular individual who was a very good salesperson, but she really didn't see the value in keeping the rest of her team informed. And we did one of these values exercises at a retreat, a sales retreat, and kind of went through because I knew there was a problem. You can just sense it and feel it. And she was a very nice person, very good, very smart, all that kind of stuff. But there was tension, and when there's tension, you're not producing. And so I needed to get everybody producing. And we did this values exercise. And at the end of the day, the rest of the team, which was about 10 people, valued teamwork. And this one person would not agree that teamwork was a value and that she would never agree to that, which, again, was part of the problem. So unfortunately, after that retreat, I had to sit down with her and have a conversation and say, wow, that was sort of instructive. And, it really shows that the way that we're selling is not really congruent to the values and beliefs that you have. And she goes, no, it's really not. I don't see why it's necessary. And I said, well, unfortunately, it's not going to work out in our team. So, I suggest that you find an organization that might be better suited to your sales style. And I'm happy to help you do that. We'll give you a month to do it. So anyway, we made her available to industry and, gave her a referral. She wasn't a bad person, wasn't a bad salesperson, but it wasn't working for us. And that's one of the hard calls as the CEO or owner of the organization is that you've got to enforce those values. And that was one of the things about enforcing the values. Another place that you can live your values is in your strategic planning process. Again, if you have a value of collaboration, then the strategic planning process should really include all your different departments and or mid-level managers, perhaps. And maybe if one of your values is strategic, or one of your values is customer-centric or something about that. Maybe you want to invite some of your customers in. So in whatever process you're doing, make sure that it's embracing the values of the organization, that in the organization that you have. Another one is your customer engagement process. This is where you'll find that customers really do and are attracted towards values in an organization. If you tell them what they are, they actually want to help you. They want to help you be successful. And so you will instantly know which customers are right for your organization and your sales methodology, your process, your values, and which aren't. We all know the 80-20 rule that, 80% of your revenue is coming from 20% of your customers. Those 20% of your customers are the ones who are culturally aligned with whatever it is you're selling or what service you're providing. The rest of them may or may not be, but my guess is at least 20% of them aren't. And so in evaluating whether a new customer is right for you, this is a good way to use is your values. And one of the things you'll know where a customer is not aligned to your values is that pain in the butt customer that we all have had, where we just go, I can't believe that, I can't stand that customer, but they give us good business and, blah, blah, blah. Well, at the end of the day, they are actually taking away room for those customers who really, in fact, are suited towards you. So just something to think about. Another one where you can live your intentional culture is in your employee compensation and rewards program. If you really value individuality, for example, but everybody is compensated exactly the same, that's a little bit disconnect. If you, again, have collaboration or value the team, but yet it's an individual-based bonus, that's, again, different. So you would have to compensate based on the performance of the team. And your rewards program, if you, value love or fun or creativity or things like that, create various reward programs that match that. In my company, we had the company values, and then we created a specific award each year that was, the collaboration award, who had really shown collaboration. Again, just another way to sort of live your values. And again, in your celebration practices, like I said, if fun is one of your values, you better have a lot more of it than one picnic, or how you reward people or how you reward the organization. I worked with a company who made, just really amazing stuff, tchotchkes basically, rubber chickens, atomic lunch boxes, you name it. There was just, wild stuff that they sold all over the place. And he really valued the creativity of his employees, but he wasn't sure how to celebrate it, and they never really had celebrated. Well, a lot of these people were not making a whole lot of money. And so one of the things he did was he gave everybody $100. He chartered a bus, and he had 75 employees. And he took them all to the local mall, and he gave them an hour and a half to go buy something. And he had a couple of rules. They couldn't buy anything for anybody else. They had to spend the money, and then they had to bring what they bought back to the company and tell them why they bought it. And so that became sort of like their legend, because it really embraced that person, and he wanted to give them something specifically for them versus then, for their families or for anybody else. And in those stories that people told about why they bought what they bought, everybody learned so much more about everybody else that the company, quite frankly, just shot off from that. And so then again, they did do it for multiple years after that. Sometimes you don't get as much bang for the buck as you do when you do those multiple times, but in this particular case, that became sort of their legend. But that's just another way to live your culture. So now we're going to move on to intentional culture and hiring. So I'm going to just open it up and see if there's any thing that I've talked about so far that anybody's got questions on or wants to challenge me, or how do I do this kind of thing. Yeah, I don't see any questions down there in the chat. All right, well, we'll keep going then. So, here's one. Do you recommend doing this with your team? Absolutely. I absolutely recommend this. First of all, go through the exercise yourself just for you personally to figure out what your values might be, but then use your team to come up with the company values. And the reason I say this is because they may have changed since you started the business. They may have changed a little bit more based on who you hired. And so I usually bring in, when I help a company go through this, I bring in all of the senior level managers. And, depending on how big the company is, if there's only 10 employees, I just bring everybody in. It's really not bad because you help them identify their individual values and then also the company values. And the way to do it as an organization, if you want to do it yourself, is simply to get a big sheet of get a big flip chart and have everybody yell out every value they can ever think of. Get them started with like that one slide where I have a bunch of them listed. And you just start writing down values. And you'll end up with probably 40 or 50 of them down. Well, then you post them up all over the wall. Make sure to get Post-it paper. It's easier than taping them up. And you start crossing out the ones that mean the same. So you start going, okay, well, can we get rid of this one? Does this mean the same? And you'll narrow the list down to about 20. And then you'll ask the group, okay, can anybody else agree to let one of these go, or can we all agree to let any of them go? And you might get it down to about 15 or so. And then you just give everybody 5 stickies and little Post-it notes, and they get to go up and vote. And so the ones that don't get any vote get eliminated. And then you'll get it down to about 8 to 10. And then that's where the conversations really start. And people have to defend a value if they want to keep it. And that's where you get some really rich conversations. The whole thing takes, with 8 to 10 people, it can take an hour to an hour and a half to get through it. Okay, anything else before we move on to hiring? Thanks for the question, Diane. Okay, so why does it matter in hiring? Well, there's a couple of reasons. So you may have seen some statistics, but they're actually true. An incorrect hire costs you 3 times the annual salary. So if you're hiring a $50,000 a year person, the actual cost of the organization is going to be about $150,000. That's not only in the recruiting costs that you paid, in the pay that you actually paid them, but in the lost productivity and the hiccup to the organization and to your customers and vendors by hiring the wrong person. Very, very costly. So I always encourage organizations to hire based on values. And what happens is if you hire a cultural misfit, so, say somebody shows up and, people interview well. Okay, let me just be clear. People know how to interview. And it may be the best time you ever seen, by the way. So you have to really dig down. And so if you get somebody in there that doesn't share, say, 3 of the 4 values of the organization, they are going to try and take as many people as they possibly can away from the values of the organization. They're going to try and get people to follow them. Now, they don't necessarily do this intentionally. This is what we as human beings do. When you sit down and talk to somebody and you just have this conversation like you've known them forever, my guess is you've got some shared values, and you just think this person is great. Well, it's because you're seeing yourself in this person. And so once in a while we'll interview somebody, and because people are good interviewers, they will match what you want to hear. And you think you've hired somebody who's just a great fit for your organization. And in fact, they have no intention of, believing in your values. But they want other people like them. So they'll subtly and slowly try to show how your organization is not very good, and look at this, look at that. And then that's when you get cultural dysfunction. And so it's really important to identify those misfits for your organization really early on and call it what it is, a values disconnect. And if you can't correct that, then you get rid of them because you can always train for skills, but you cannot change someone's character and or values. They just don't change. So I always say hire slowly and fire quickly. People don't necessarily like this because they always want to give somebody another chance. They always want to, be kind and blah, blah, blah. Well, if you have gone through your process in your manual that says, we'll do 3 things, we verbal warning, then written, then fire, or whatever your process might be. If you've gone through it, get rid of them. Because the most expensive time in your life as an entrepreneur is when you lose faith in that human being and when you actually do something about it. Because during that time, that employee does damage to your organization, and you worry about it, so you lose all this other sleep. So the minute that you think you have a problem, you've tested you have a problem, you've tried to fix the problem, and it's not going away, do something about it. They'll be happier, you'll be happier, and the rest of your employees will say, oh, thank goodness, why did it take them so long? On the other side of it is you've got to really hire slowly. You've got to be very careful. And I know sometimes you might miss good people because of this, but it will pay off in the end. So reinforcing your values daily starts with your hiring practices. And so I hire for character and values, and I train for skills. It typically works well, although, hiring is an art as much as it is in science. So you've all heard of the behavioral-based questions, but what I do is develop those questions around values. So here I'm just giving you an example of a company that I did. They had horrible luck hiring. They had 3 very senior positions that had all turned over in the past year. Very, very expensive for them. It was a manufacturing company, and they developed products for the audio industry. So after, working, they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. They came up with 7 values. I could not get them to eliminate these down any further, but, that's there, so that was fine. So they had integrity, customer-centric, excellence, flexibility, adaptability, dynamic, and collaborative. So what I wanted, and they kept saying, well, we should test the employee. We should have them, do a problem or an engineering problem or whatever. And I'm like, look, their resume should speak for themselves. We should not be interviewing anybody that doesn't have the technical qualifications for the job. So either we've already vetted it, we know, and the first thing you can do in an interview before you even get to the values is have that person walk you through their resume backwards, forward. So I like to have them say, well, tell me, your first job, because what I'm looking for is transitions. What I'm looking for is those stories. When they tell you the stories, you're going to hear values. And so if you start to hear 3 transitions because they didn't like their boss, they might have a problem with authority. They might not feel valued, or something is not quite right. You're going to hear things that will give you pause that you'll want to ask more about. And let's just assume that their technical qualifications are there, and or you might give them another test for that. But when you're hiring for values, you want to come up with questions that are based on the values of your organization. So, for example, this one says, give me an example of when you dealt with a work situation that was out of integrity with either your own or your company's values, and how did you handle it? And the purpose of behavioral-based questions is that you want people to give you real-life examples, not what they might do, what they will do, okay, what they have done in the past. Because we can all tell you what you want to hear and what we might do. We're going to say, oh, what would they like to hear? Let's see, what would be the best way to handle this? It may not be what you would do at all, but it's what you're going to tell somebody. So what you want to do here is, well, give me an example of that. And if they tell you the answer to this one is, oh, gosh, I've really never had that happen, I would not believe that, because everybody has had an integrity issue at work. When you were told, to look over something, or when another employee was doing something, you had to wrestle with, do I turn them in? Do I talk to the employee? What do I do? Everybody in their working life, if they've at least been working for 5 or 10 years, has had an example of that. The next one was when working on a project, define good enough. In other words, what's your acceptable standards for completion? So, and this goes to excellence. So what does excellence mean to you without saying the word excellence? Okay, because you want to get them to define it, because people have sort of a belief about what excellence is, but you want to find, what good enough. And some people say, well, getting it turned in on time, that was good enough. well, it's whatever somebody said. It's not about, doing the best that you could possibly do. So these are what you're listening for in these questions. And here's a few more. Can you tell me about a time when you had dueling priorities, both with deadlines? How did you prioritize? This one goes to flexibility. Okay, so how did you get this done? How did you use the resources around you to get this done? What sort of expectations do you have of your team's performance? How have you held them accountable in the past? Give me an example of when it didn't work out as you had expected, and how did you react to it? So, these are about performance, about accountability. And, you really want to probe for those questions, and it may take them a minute to think of it. In the past, give me a work example of how you've collaborated with other departments to achieve a goal. This goes to collaboration. And how did you deal with not having direct responsibility for the other team's performance? How did you relate with your manager or leader? Again, collaboration. And the last couple of ones. Give me an example of one of the most successful negotiations you've ever had. Why was that? What was the result? And what was the least successful and why? And what would you have done differently? What you're looking for is learning in the things that they've done. What would they do differently? And, what do they value as a successful negotiation? And you would be completely surprised at some of the answers I've gotten to these questions. Well, we got the sale. That was a successful negotiation. Did the customer feel like it was successful? Well, they bought it, So you've really got to kind of probe down into those. And if they don't have any of these, they're probably not qualified for the job because they don't have the experience that you're really looking for. And the last one, what does customer-centric mean to you? How did it, show up at your last company? And, how did you deal with it? And here's a good one, give me a time when the customer was upset or wrong, and how did you deal with it? You want to get an idea of what wrong means to them, and how they talk about customers, and it's really very instructive. The whole point of behavioral-based questioning is to go back into the past and see what behaviors they have shown, and you have to get them to tell the stories because otherwise they will make stuff up. Oh, I guess I had a couple more. Can you tell me about a time when a deadline was not going to be met for a customer? You didn't have any more resources to solve the problem. How did you solve it? This goes to resourcefulness. How did they think on their feet? And then this was a particular one that the owner really wanted to put in because he said this all the time. I want people to roll up their sleeves and get to work. So I said, well, let's find out what that means to different people. And it was interesting because it meant a lot of different things. And then we said, when was the last time you had to do this? Oh, well, I don't do that anymore, not at my level. People, okay, I guess you're not the kind of person that we want in this organization. So anyway, you can take those values that you have and roll them and put together questions based on that. Okay, let's see. Diane's got a question over here. It says, in our industry, we have a true shortage of skill-based applicants when we have an opening. Would you recommend hiring for values and training skills from scratch for plumbers so the learning curve is long? So yes and no, okay? If you have the resources to train them, absolutely, because you'll get people hired that value the same things that you do, and longevity-wise, they'll probably stay at your organization because they believe in your values, and now you've invested time in getting them up to speed. But if you're hiring journeyman plumbers or people who are already in the industry, definitely I would not bring them on board if they don't match your values, because they'll always pretty much be working against you. They're the kind of guys who will go off and start their own business, or they'll be the ones who will jump at the better offer at any time. And quite frankly, it's not worth it to you. Most small to mid-sized businesses cannot handle that kind of turnover. So if you can train them, yes. If not, interview the heck out of them for values. Okay, so the hiring process that I put in place is pretty simple, but important to follow, at least in my mind. And so it's make sure your job description is concise. And I don't believe in huge, long job descriptions, because what you want is one paragraph or two at the most of the responsibilities. what is this person supposed to do in this job? If this job were being done successfully, what would they be doing? At the end of the day, they're responsible for X. Then I always divide the next two things up into required characteristics and desired characteristics. The reason I separate these two out is that you can put down all the desired characteristics you want. For example, 5 years of experience in our industry, a bachelor's degree or a master's degree. And you put those down as required characteristics, and let's say you find somebody who is perfect for the role, matches your values, has all the right job training, but they've only had 3 years, not 5. You just put down that was a required characteristic. You may run into trouble if you hire them over somebody that had that. So all I'm saying is if you would make an exception, it goes under desired. If it's an absolute for that particular position, such as, say, for a plumber where they have to have a certain certification, that would become a required characteristic. Or if you're in a field where they have to have a degree in order to do something, that's a required. It's a non-negotiable. So in the desired, put some of the things that might be negotiable, leave the required for the things that you would not bend on. And then that's really all you need in the job description. But the devil is in the details, and that's really what I found is in the interview. So a lot, I would have to say that in dealing with entrepreneurs, as long as I have, interviewing, people don't like it, okay? It's hard. We don't do it well. We're intimidated by it, and we're like, yeah, okay, they're good. Well, don't take it that way. Really take it seriously and take your time. And so what I like to do is have 2 to 3 different interviews, depending upon the level of the position. If it's a position that's, paying over $75,000, $80,000 a year, you're going to want to do 3 different times. And I like to do it in 3 different places. For example, I interviewed a lot of salespeople. Well, for me, I wanted to make sure that these people had good manners. So I would interview them in the office first, and then I would take them out to lunch because I wasn't going to hire anybody that had bad manners. I mean, they have to take people out. I wanted to see if they held the door. I wanted to see, if they tried to pick up the check. I wanted to see, how they treated the wait staff. I'm looking at everything, not just what they tell me. I'm looking at everything. The other thing it gives you an opportunity to do is to see how well they dressed twice or 3 times. Because everybody's got one nice outfit for an interview, but if it's something where they've got to be, looking nice every day, how do they comport themselves the second and the third time? And then the other thing that I do is with different people. So typically what I would do, I would almost always be the last one to interview. I would let my team do the first couple of interviews because I really didn't want to waste my time with somebody that my team wasn't going to like. And so what we would do is we would create those values-based questions for each of the positions, and it was like the same 10 questions. And each of the teams would ask the same questions. You won't get through all 10 of those in an interview. You may get through 4 or 5 that are the most important. And then what we would do is get back as a group and compare notes. Did we ask them the same questions? Did they give us the same answer? It's very difficult for people to lie exactly the same way twice. So if we got the same kind of answer, we knew it was probably realistic. So it was just really interesting to compare notes. So that's why I always say interview 2 to 3 different times with different people or teams and different places. Now, the only caution I have with teams, and you're going to have different people, let them know ahead of time what their level of authority is in the decision-making process for that hire. So if they're not going to be the ultimate say, let them know ahead of time. Tell them you're looking only for a recommend or no, but ultimately you or somebody else is going to have the hiring authority, just so that you set your expectations properly with those people. The other really important thing to ask a person in an interview, not necessarily for a line position on the manufacturing floor, although you certainly can, as that's an important position, but I always ask them what their 60 and 90-day goals and expectations are, because I want to know what they think they're going to do in their first, 60, 90 days. and what they hope to achieve and what resources they might need. It tells me a little bit about how they think. So those are some of the things that I do in the interview. Now let's assume, you've gone through this, you've narrowed down a couple people, you've made an offer, and they've accepted. This is another place that organizations fall down a little bit, and that is on welcoming or onboarding somebody, coming into an organization. When somebody leaves, retires, or something like that, we make a big deal about it. But when they start, usually the first thing we do is hand them a whole bunch of paperwork. They can fill it out, put them in the conference room, and sometimes their stuff is ready and sometimes it's not. It's not a real welcoming thing. I had one company who, when they brought somebody on board, not only did they make a huge deal the first day for the particular person, but they sent a basket home to the person's spouse on the first day saying, thank you for letting them come to work for us. So that now the spouse is totally on board. If this person has to work a little bit of extra time, hey, they're okay with it. So I'm a huge believer in making that first day really all about that person and how happy you are that they've joined you. Do things that are consistent with your values. Maybe wait for a few days to have them do the paperwork unless there's some legal things they have to sign ahead of time. Take them around and introduce them to everybody. And this is a big deal, especially if you can do it as the entrepreneur or the owner, if your organization's not too big. It's really important because not only do you then go get to say hello to all your employees, but you get to introduce them to the newest member of the team. And celebrate based on your values. So whatever your values are, if they're, something about collaboration or fun, have a fun lunch where everybody can be there. If, it's just about the sales team or something, then, take them out for lunch with the sales team. The other thing you can do is have the employees explain the values of the organization. And they all should have something on their desk that says what they are, and they should be able to say them readily and easily. Otherwise, they're not really living the values. And the other thing. Whoops, there we go. Okay, are we back? Okay, we're good. Give them their 30, 60, 90, and 180-day expectations or plans. One of the biggest things that you hear from employees about why they're not happy with the organization that they just want to work for is that they don't know what's expected of them. So I always tell them, here's the things I expect you to be proficient in and have learned or have done on 30 days. Here's what 60 days is. Here's what 90 days, and here's what 180 days is. And now they have a plan to work to. Their manager has a plan to work to, and everybody starts with the expectations because people get unhappy because of unmet expectations. And so it's up to you as the manager, founder, leader to lay those out right up front and then readjust. So that means you've got to meet with them at least every 30 days. Hopefully you're meeting with them more up front. And again, tell them how often you're going to follow up and how they can get access to you. And then the other thing is, have all their equipment ready on the first day that they start. Not having a laptop for them or a desk or a chair, or you had their station all set up and then everybody went and took like the good chair and the good thing and they ended up with all the garbage that was left over in the office. That's not very welcoming to people. Or if they still don't have their laptop by the end of the first day, a week, how special are they feeling, in the organization? So anyway, it's just a couple little things to make sure you get started off. Because remember, if they leave, it's a very expensive departure. So any questions on the hiring pieces of it before we kind of go to the conclusion here? Okay, I don't see anything down there. Going through this pretty quickly. So just to sort of wrap up, intentional culture is the foundation of every business. Values matter. And why they matter is because they're there. Whether you think they are or not, they're there. And they might as well be yours. So you need to spend some time thinking about this. And so that's by making sure yours are intentional. Now, one of the things that people ask me a lot at this point is, how do you change culture? Well, it's really, really difficult to change a culture. What you can do is try to embrace and move the culture that you already have. To change a culture, you're going to have to get rid of some people, because there are some people in that organization, if it's not working, that are very attached to that particular culture, and you're probably going to have to get rid of some of them if they are at odds with your values. And that's where values exercise is so powerful, because you can figure out who the outliers are and who is not particularly aligned with your vision and values for your organization. Reinforce your values and your culture at every level and always. I'll just give you a quick success story, actually, of one of my first-year participants. They're now on their third year. And when they took the Emerging Leaders class, the company had been in business for 8 years. They were doing about $2.5 million. And there was 3 owners, and they had about 8 employees. And it was a pretty competitive marketplace in their particular niche. And they were working their tails off and not making very much money. And so the first thing that we looked at in the organization, well, what are your values? And what they found out was that the 3 owners actually had different values. 2 were aligned, 1 was not. So the first thing they did was make the one owner sort of a silent owner, but not, involved in the business, because it just didn't work. Secondly, they made one of the partners, the one who was in my class, the leader of the organization. And so he now became the CEO. So there was one person responsible for all of this. They identified their values, they identified their mission and vision, and they told everybody about them, and they started changing everything in their company to do this. Now, it took about a year, but what was interesting is between when he started the class in April and by the time he finished the class, he had completely scrapped the first growth plan that he had and come up with a different one. And remember I said the previous year they had done $2.3 million. During that time of the class, things started clicking. And by the end of that first year, after the class started, 6 months after the class had started, they were on track to do about $6 million, literally more than doubling their business. And, there's a lot of other things that led to that, but they were able to take advantage of things because they could move very quickly because they were aligned. And so they came up with the plan. They literally blew the plan out in a year. They created a new plan, and I'm really happy to say that I just had lunch with him about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and they have been on the fastest growing small companies here in Seattle for 2 years running. They will do $13 million this year, and they're probably going to be on track to do $20 million next year. And he attributes it to what he learned in the class and his growth plan and getting aligned with his culture and his values and getting him in the right seat as the CEO. So it was hugely powerful for this particular company, and I think it was a combination of the values and the material and everything that he learned in the Emerging Leaders class. And let's see, so talk about reinforcing it at every level. And then hiring is the start of creating intentional culture, and sometimes you do have to do a little bit of cleaning house. And the way I used to tell CEOs about it is, okay, look around at your staff and ask yourself if you would hire those people today knowing what you know now about them. And if you wouldn't, probably time to do a little house cleaning. And nobody can take your values. No one can take your values from you. Only you can give them away. And unfortunately, I have seen people give their values away a lot. Just look at politicians, how they start and how they finish. They'll say anything to anybody to get what they want. They've given them up. So stand up for who you are. You'll be glad you did. There's no wrong values. There's dysfunctional organizations that aren't aligned and culturally intentional. And there's organizations who are living and breathing an intentional culture, and those are the ones that ultimately thrive in the end. Okay, well, that's everything I had today. I'll take any questions. We still have about 20 minutes, and you can find me. There's my book. You can get it on Amazon, or you can go to my website at mary-marshall.com. So any questions? All right. Well, I'm not hearing any. And if anybody, wants to email me afterwards, feel free to do so, and I'm happy to help. This is obviously something I'm passionate about. But thanks for joining us today, and I wish you all the best of luck in your businesses.
Thank you so much, Mary. Just as a reminder to everyone, we'll post this on Interise Connect afterwards, and feel free to ask any questions there if you have any that you didn't get a chance to ask here. So thank you very much, Mary.
All right. Thank you.